Hello, everybody. We are expecting severe weather across the United States today with a mostly wind risk, but isolated areas with a higher probability of hail and tornado potential. The day is Wednesday, June 4th, 2025, and let's dive right into the forecast. Here's our day one convective outlook from the SPC page, and we can see that we are expecting widespread thunderstorms across the US with a couple areas of greater focus today, extending from southern Colorado to the Texas-Mexico border. And then we have a kind of French fry marginal risk extending from the lower Great Lakes to eastern Texas. Today's risk is mostly fueled by a wind threat with a 5% wind risk in our eastern Texas to lower Great Lakes area, along with a isolated 15% from eastern New Mexico into the Texas Panhandle. We can see that for our hail risk, the SPC has decided not to highlight our eastern Texas to lower Great Lakes area, but they have highlighted a isolated 15% accompanying that wind risk in our eastern New Mexico to Texas Panhandle area. For tornado potential today, it is a low but not zero, with two isolated 2% tornado risk, one in our Midwest, eastern Missouri, southern Illinois, and western Indiana area, and then one in our eastern New Mexico and Texas Panhandle area. For our day two convective outlook, the SPC is certainly expecting a ramp up in severe weather with a marginal accompanying those storms that created that marginal for the day one, and then a sort of P-shaped slight risk starting in western Texas and then extending up into central Oklahoma and southern Kansas and southeastern Colorado. This is once again expected to be a mostly wind and hail threat with a 15% wind risk in our P-shaped slight risk area, and then kind of a long leg extending up into the northeast of 5% wind. Looking at our hail risk, there is once again a 15% hail risk associated with that slight area, with a hatched region of increased confidence and large hail up here in the Oklahoma Panhandle. Accompanying this is a 5% tornado risk in the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles as well. For our day three outlook, we see our pattern from day two kind of sticks around with a very widespread slight risk extending from the Texas and Oklahoma panhandle all the way to eastern Tennessee and Kentucky. And then for our day four risk, the Storm Prediction Center has highlighted a large airplane-shaped risk also extending from the Texas-Oklahoma panhandle, but this time it extends all the way out to the eastern coast of the United States in South Carolina. For our convective allowing models today, we are going to take a peek at our Midwest tornado risk and our Southwest sector for severe weather today. And we can see that the HRRR is expecting storm initiation around the early afternoon, with it sustaining itself into the evening and night hours. Now, the HRRR is forecasting a non-discrete, more messy and scattered storm mode, so this would lead to increased confidence in a more wind risk than hail and tornado threat. Although it is important to note that large hail and a tornado or two are not off the table. Moving on to our Midwest risk area, we're looking for why that tornado threat is sort of being forecasted, and we can see it's sort of a similar situation to yesterday with a area of confluence in front of our line, which could cause those prefrontal cells. And what could happen here? Those will be in the most conducive environment for tornadoes, and as they crash into the line, they could temporarily have their vorticity increased, leading to possible tornado genesis in that 2% tornado risk area. This would be predicted to occur around the late afternoon to evening hours. For our upper air components today, we can see that today's weather across the Southwest is going to be caused by this little short wave right here, and that is going to help create lift and forcing for storms to fire in that risk area. And then, of course, our line of storms up here is going to be caused by that large-scale trough dipping into the upper and central United States. Taking a peek at our convective parameters, we can see that one of the limiting factors today in our Southwest risk area is actually going to be a lack of instability. In our primary risk area today, we can see that our instability peaks around 1,000, which Sure, it is enough for storms to initiate, but it's definitely lower than the ideal amount. Our significant tornado parameter kind of agrees with this by showing some significant tornado parameter out here in our main risk area, but it's very scattered and it's very small amounts. However, we do see in our Midwest area larger significant tornado parameter, which is kind of cause for that 2% risk area today. Looking at our 0 to 3 kilometer helicity, so updraft sustaining helicity, we actually do see a fair amount up here in our main risk area today, which means that these updrafts could sustain and become powerful, producing that risk for all hazards out here. Our 0 to 1 kilometer SRH, most associated with tornado genesis, is definitely scarce in our main risk area today, definitely hindering that tornado threat. One thing we do notice though is that naturally as the low level jet increases during sunset, we do see a little increase in helicity out in front of our storms. So sunset could be the time for maximum tornado potential today. Here's our weather sounding for our southwest risk area today, and immediately we notice we do see some curving in the lower levels in our hodograph, and then it sort of straightens out and it's fairly elongated. This hodograph shape could foster a all hazards risk. Now down here we do see some wind veering, which could sort of increase that spin, and we do see some okay low level shear, but it is very low in the first kilometer, sort of hindering that threat. However, in the upper levels, we do see somewhat significant deep layer shear, which could help these storms stay organized and sustain their updrafts for longer. Additionally, looking at our SRH, we see our updraft sustaining SRH is quite high, but our SRH in the first kilometer is lower, sort of lowering that tornado threat today. Something to note is that as that low level jet ramps up and these two parameters increase for a temporary amount of time, that will most likely be the most conducive window for tornado genesis. Moving over to our thermodynamics, we see we have very low LCLs, which means that these storms could produce tornadoes, but we do see a higher lowest free convection. So that is why our storm mode and storm coverage is kind of uncertain for today. Although our moisture and temperature is not abundant, we do see a decent temperature dew point spread. We do see some dry air aloft, helping with that a lift, and there probably is enough forcing out here today for that to not be an issue. We see 7.1 Celsius decreasing per kilometer lapse rates. That's good, but we do see some stable air that storms could run into along the first kilometer, sort of increasing that question on storm coverage today. Before we look at the main limiting factor, I'm going to look at precipitable water, which is quite modest today. This means that storms downdrafts could not be as strong, sort of lowering the potential for wind. Now, for our main limiting factor today, it is going to be our instability. As you can see here, it is fairly low, and that means that storms might have a harder time staying organized and sustaining despite all of our other favorable parameters. The last thing we're going to do today is look at a longer term forecast from the European model. Looking at the present, we can see our line of storms moving off to the east with our storms around Florida. Moving on to Thursday, we can kind of see in our slight risk area for our day 2, here is our convection. And then as we move into Friday, we can see our storms across that slight risk area sort of starting in that Texas, Oklahoma panhandle like expected and moving off towards the eastern coast of the United States. After that, the weather gets more uncertain, but a couple of patterns that should be monitored is this large trough up here in Canada and kind of this boundary that it's expected to drape across the United States, which could cause weather. And then it could bring a rare severe weather threat to the northeast, depending if the ingredients are present, along with more weather potentially severe along that boundary that it drapes across the United States. Because today's forecast was shorter in nature, let's take a quick peek at the National Hurricane Center website And as we noticed, they are not expecting any hurricanes or tropical storms within the next 7 days. As a closing comment, I would like to say if you're interested in keeping up with tropical weather during hurricane season, I would highly recommend checking out the National Hurricane Center's website, as they are the most credible and reliable source for information regarding tropical systems.